good afternoon, everyone, on this Thursday, 23rd of July, 2026. I'm Juliana da Penha. I'm the founder of Migrant Women Press. We are an independent media platform created to amplify the voices of migrant and racialized women. At Migrant Women Press, we believe every woman deserves the opportunity to tell their own story in their own words. And we believe that migrant and racialized women should not only be subjects of the stories, but they need to be the ones telling them. And through journalism, opinion, and storytelling, we work to amplify voices and perspectives that are often overlooked. And we are creating opportunities for women to share their experiences, their ideas, and their perspectives in their own terms. So we are delighted to have us today with us for these conversations that we're going to start. But before introducing our special guest, I would like to hand over to my colleague and co-host Laura, who will tell a little bit more what Amplifying her story is about.
Thank you, Juliana. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so pleased you're here for the very first episode of Amplifying Her Story. This series was created because we believe every published story opens the door to a much bigger conversation. Each month, we will sit down with one of the incredible women who has published with Migrant Women Press to explore not only the stories she has shared with the world, but also her personal and professional journey, the work and causes she cares deeply about, and the experiences that have shaped her voice. Some of our guests are journalists, while others are campaigners, community leaders, researchers, artists, entrepreneurs, and women with lived experiences. What connects them is their commitment to using stories to inform, inspire, and create change. Sometimes our conversations will focus on an article or an opinion piece they've written. Other times, that publication will simply be the starting point for a wider conversation about their journey, their work, and the issues they're passionate about. Our hope is that this series not only introduces you to the remarkable women, but also celebrates diverse perspectives, sparks meaningful conversations, and inspires more women to tell their own stories. So, thank you for joining us. And now I'll hand back to Juliana to introduce today's special guest.
Thank you, Laura. Today, we are delighted to open this interview series welcoming a special guest, Chylian Ify Azuh, who is joining us from Lagos, Nigeria. Chylian is a survivor advocate and migration expert working at the intersection of women's empowerment, migrants' rights, and anti-human trafficking. Guided by her lived experience, she advocates for safe migration, survival leadership, and systems that protect people from exploitation. She believes that when women and survivors are empowered to lead, lasting change becomes possible. She's also the co-founder of the Female Returned Migrants Network, FREMNET, a survivor-led non-profit organization in Nigeria, empowering and supporting female returned migrants, particularly survivors of human trafficking, forced labor, and gender-based violence. In 2024, at Migrant Women Press, she published the opinion piece, Ensuring Survivors' Safety and Dignity. Human trafficking reporting needs a more human approach. Today, we'll explore not only the ideas discussed in this article, but also her journey, the work she leads, and the experiences that shaped her voice. Chylian, welcome.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm really grateful that I have this opportunity to join in the first episode. Thank you.
We are glad to have you as the first interviewer for this episode. And to begin, I would like to ask if you could introduce yourself, tell a little bit about your journey, about what made you become a human rights advocate, especially focusing on the risks of human trafficking for women.
Okay, so like you mentioned earlier, my name is Chylian Ify Azuh, and I live in Lagos, Nigeria. prior to this time where I have stepped fully into advocating for women's rights and migrants' rights, I had lived experience. I actually had this experience, and as at the time it happened, right, most persons would have assumed that being a graduate or being someone who is at least experienced to a certain extent, you should not be a victim of that kind of experience, right? But then I've also realized that my story is not unique. Just like so many other women, right? There are many women who are experiencing the same thing, even on a daily basis. So my approach is, how do we ensure that it doesn't continue? Because yes, there is a lot going on to rescue, to save, to help, which I do as well. But then there is a need to find a way to prevent, to stop this from happening. How do we drastically reduce the numbers of women who experience these things, right? So that is what has inspired me to step into this role fully. I've over time thought about what possible outcomes could we have if we, as survivors, are the ones pushing for the change that we desire. I know that the outcomes would be even better because at this point, our voices would make the change, the major change that we've always hoped for. So if you ask me what's my inspiration, I think this is the frame for it.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for sharing that. You said something very deep, that survivors are the ones taking the lead into this. What could happen if all systems were to help abolish all this irregular trafficking, that, well, not irregular trafficking, irregular immigration, and to cut those numbers, if not even as we lead to tackling them and abolishing it fully. And you just answered the question I was going to ask you about the inspiration for starting FremNet. But maybe you can tell us a little bit more about FremNet, the journey of beginning, and how far you have come.
Okay. So FremNet, when I came back to Nigeria, because my entire experience happened within 2017, and then I returned the same year. So when I came back to Nigeria, I struggled a bit to reintegrate. It was not very easy because I also had a 4-month-old child that I left at home before traveling. So coming back home, trying to start my life again, I figured, while having several conversations with certain women, particularly single moms, women who, had like a lot of responsibility and who were also going through abuse, various forms of abuse. I remember meeting one whose husband at the time was not considering the fact that she just got out of a very traumatic experience and then had a miscarriage. A lot was just going on with her, but the husband was not considerate. And sharing her experience with me, I just thought that means we need our own community, because if she could trust me enough to, have this conversation, we were walking on the road when she was sharing deeply how pained she was, how she was going through this thing all by herself. How much would it cost us to have a community where we could, come together often to talk about these things? So that inspired me. I quickly started thinking of, okay, how do we have this platform? What does it require, right? As at this time, I didn't have any experience with running an NGO. I just wanted a community for women. So that was the inspiration behind FremNet. And so when I created that, I realized almost immediately, because whilst we were trying to take care of ourselves as a community, we started having people who were stranded in other countries reach out to us. They needed support. So it grew quickly. You know how you want to create something small, and from that small thing, God just puts a bigger responsibility in your hands, right? That was just the form FremNet took immediately after creating the community. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you.
And yeah, really interesting to follow your work, because since I started to get in touch with you, I started to follow the work that you do through social media. And then what you are saying about a community of women, it's really powerful, because that's what women need, especially returned migrants, because it's such a underreported issue. And then now, with all these immigration policies that are being implemented in Europe, for example, we will see more and more women returning. And then understand their experiences is really important, also to provide the adequate support as you are doing. And then could you tell a little bit more? What have you learned supporting all these returned migrants, and what are the support that is in need to create the appropriated resources and support for them? Because we know that when people return, there are a lot of challenges, as you are saying. So what kind of supports they need, and then what are the experiences that you can share?
Okay, so lessons that I've learned. The first one, like we mentioned, is that community is one of the most important thing for anyone who is coming out of something this traumatic, right? That lesson is also drawn from, having women who probably have trusted systems and, have been stigmatized, have been um, treated poorly because most of the systems do not even understand the weight of what they've been through, right? So having one of the biggest lesson is that this community is important, it's relevant, it's something that even if we don't talk often about it, has also given hope to many of the women. Another lesson that I would say I've learned is the fact that our stories might be similar, but there is always a difference, right? So the approach with support for each person has to be unique because their experiences is unique, right? I learned that based on the fact that on a regular basis, on a daily basis, you hear from these women, you talk to them, you spend time with most of them, you figure that, oh, these experiences look alike, but they are not the same. So there is no, I've heard from systems where we say tailor-made approach to ensure that everyone receives the same kind of empowerment. Now, absolutely not. So one of the lessons that I learn and I hold on to and I keep talking about is the fact that we have to understand that regardless of how the experiences look alike, the approach to ensuring that each person is reintegrated or supported or empowered has to be different. Another lesson I've learned is that here we underestimate self-organizing. It's interesting how we don't talk about self-organizing, but I figured that that is even one big thing that we should not neglect. Um, I would try as much as I can to keep talking about it to see how much more we could do. But then, this environment does not fully accept or encourage it or even empower it. So asking next, what do the women need? What is it that I figured that they need that we are able to provide, or what could we do better to further support them? I would say here, most times when people are returning, there is this idea that the first thing they need is the basic needs. Once that is given, but then I've also realized quickly that the first thing they need is someone to hear them out, to listen and not to talk over them. Most of the time, it's mostly psychological needs. Whilst there is a need to also, factor every other thing in, the first point for me is, and that's what makes us stand out, is the fact that we listen. We listen to what actually do these women need, right? And then, there are other needs. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
When you
Yes.
consider the fact that the actual reason for migration is not settled or solved, and then the person is back into the same environment that pushed them out in the first place, right? You figure that there is a lot that the person actually needs to be able to reintegrate or to come back to normal, which is very rare. You barely even see anyone who is coming back to normal. I was sharing with someone that I usually don't talk, but now if anything happens, I'm triggered. I want to speak. I want to say something. All of that happened because of my experience, right? So hardly would you find anyone who is coming back to normal, but to at least attain that level where you can say this person is able to pick up and move forward, right? I think that helping them realize what they could do to solve most of those things that pushed them out in the first place is one of the things that is needed. Another one that is underestimated is justice. Here in Nigeria, hardly is it talked about. And justice for everyone means different things. In my own case, it might be to get my trafficker. In another person's case, it might be to get the trafficker to settle them. It might be just different things, right, for each person. It might just be for some persons to just get empowered and move on, right? Having the platform to see each person's needs as supposed and be able to, give them the platform to get justice in the way they want it and not the way we perceive as society or the way we want it to go, right? Because there is this idea that there is already a framework. And because there is a framework, you barely even listen to survivors. You have systems forcing survivors to take what they've created, the available program, right? We are looking as a community to not be that, to not replicate what the system has, but to be that difference that the survivors have access to. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So many lessons that you have learned, and I'm sure it's taken time and understanding that every woman's case is unique and they need to be attended with care and a lot of love, and community is where you get that love and sense of belonging. So well done. But another question we had for you today is, what inspired you to publish the piece that you wrote with us about 2 years ago, and why was it important for you to tell that story?
Okay, so two things. The first one is my own personal experience with media. So media thinks that they have a right to just take your story and publish it whichever way pleases them. I had this incident months prior to that particular incident that I wrote about, where a particular newspaper in Nigeria interviewed me as an expert, right? And during the course of conversation with the media personnel, I shared personal experiences to just back up the claim of one of the persons he had interviewed. So he asked me some personal things about what I experienced and what I think about. At the time, even until now, nobody talks about the medical needs of these women, right? If we're not talking about it, how do they get it? So I kind of encouraged him to include that in the article because it's something that is relevant but often overlooked. So when I encouraged him and I mentioned that the medical needs are important as an expert, I think that that is something that we should start looking at making available to them. We have the Ministry of Health. What is the Ministry of Health doing to ensure that these women have access to free health care upon arrival and at least for certain months after arrival, right? And he left what I shared and took that personal piece of my story, framed me as someone who is distressed from my own experience, and then wrote a whole lot of, in fact, people who read the article reached out to me to ask that they take it down because it didn't align with my principles, it didn't align with my goal, it didn't align with what I was working towards. And when I reached out to the media house to take down the story, they insisted that the story is meaningful to what they were working towards. And then another thing they did was at the time, there was war somewhere, I can't remember where it was. They linked my story or my experience to that war. Now, after that incident, I totally refused any formal interviews with any media houses. I just told them whenever they reached out, I told them I was not interested because I'm yet to find solution to the one that just happened, right?
Mhm.
And so also it's the fact that apart from media, people who were supposed to protect victims, who have the responsibility to protect victims or survivors, do not know their responsibility. Now, it's okay to say we will teach or educate them, but it's also not okay to wait this long for them to continually make the same mistake over and over. So you find out that when they are publishing materials about rescue, about what they've done, they have the full face and names of these victims published in articles. These are people who mostly are minors and they will pick up their lives. So when you publish articles and you tell certain kind of stories about them, it never goes away. So how is it that you who is supposed to protect them is the one even putting them in more danger? You also know that when you return them, you're taking them back to their communities where they were initially recruited. These recruiters still live there. Also, apart from the recruiters, the traffickers have direct link to those communities. So if already they are a threat to the trafficker, you've exposed them. And they are no longer just targets for their own traffickers, they are also targets for other traffickers who believe that their network or whatever they are working on, it's organized crime, is already
Mhm.
exposed. So now exposing these ladies without caring about their safety, without thinking about their future, that kind of made me really concerned. And I thought about what possible ways could we say these things so that people who were supposed to protect them are protecting them. I don't even see the need for taking pictures. I've tried to talk about it over time. Why do you think it's necessary that each time you rescue a person, you put cameras on their faces? It's not necessary. It doesn't show that you're doing so much. You can actually mention that you've rescued a number of persons without actually putting them in danger. Yeah.
Thank you, Chylian, because this is extremely important. Because from what you are saying, we can see how many wrongs created by the media, by journalists, and the authorities. And then your piece is extremely important for us. It's really important to have that article published to highlight these issues. And what you said is connected with the next question, that is the importance of sensitive and trauma approach when you are speaking about the experience of survivors. And then for us at Migrant Women Press is something that we care a lot. We are trying to implement trauma reporting in all the projects that we made because we believe that people need to be really, really careful when they write about these stories to don't create more harm. And I would like to, I know that you already said a lot, but if you could give any advice for people writing about survivor stories. We will start a new project soon, what probably, and then we want like to write more and more about gender-based violence, about people that are victims of trafficking, highlight these issues, but it needs to be done in a certain way. Any advice that you can give to people writing about these stories will be really useful because of your experience.
Yeah, so if I'm to say, I'll start with narratives are important, right? How do we make sure that what's the way we are telling these stories actually capture their experiences without causing harm, right? And remember that there is you who is writing, there is another person who is receiving, right? And so if you're writing a piece and you consider the person who is receiving and how they would process the information, right? You are more careful how you frame this information. I'll give an example with Nigeria. I think I had a panel session with IOM and National Commission, yes, with National Commission. And during this panel discussion, one of the things that really got my attention was, you know, young people, when you post videos and you talk about certain things, what we're asking is, how is it that we there are a lot of harm videos that show harm? How do I say it now? Okay, so we want to show that if you go by desert and by sea, you probably die, right? Or even if you make it, right, across the sea or enter Europe, it doesn't guarantee that you've made it in life. And so there is a lot of horror videos. How do I'm looking for better words, right? So you have these videos that really strong videos that a person would have seen and said, oh no, this is really dangerous, I shouldn't go there, right? Now, the fact that you're trying to tell a horror story to dissuade them from going has not dissuaded them. What it has actually done is that in your mind, you're dissuading, but in their mind, they are learning a lesson, and that's why we are having more and more persons going. So I tried to paint the picture that sometimes we think that until we've put these stories, show me your scars, let me take the picture of the physical scars, let me, I want to, I want to see how pained you are. In fact, cry so that I can put it out there so that people can see how dangerous it is. It doesn't, that's not what tells the actual story. I think that sometimes one of the things that has actually told the actual story for me is let the victim or the survivor tell their story the way they want. Look at how they want to be portrayed in that story. And sometimes they don't want to be portrayed as people with pain. They want to be portrayed as people who've come out of this thing and are now this while highlighting their pain. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, it
So
does.
I went through I went through this, but I'm a different person now, regardless of what I went through, right?
Mhm.
So that kind of idea, can we normalize telling the stories, narrating it in such a way that it doesn't cause harm to both the person who is receiving and the person whose story we are putting out there? So if you're considerate, if you're kind while writing, because another thing is bringing in that human element into what you're writing. So considering the fact that this is a person I'm representing in this piece. The moment you remember that I'm representing people, another thing I've also noticed is that it's not just the person who has been affected that you're also endangering. You're endangering the people who are currently in that situation. I'll give an example. You know, when people post videos of people who are in trafficking situation, like this is a girl, this is so and so, I immediately say no. Last year we had an incident where between 2024 and 2025, where a young lady was put online. The so-called person who rescued her put her on video, and she was screaming in the place. They claimed she was mentally unstable. They were saying things in our language. Somebody shared it with me and said, this person, I know her, and her family is asking for help. Can you help? So I quickly reached out to someone to help us get her out of that place. It was a lot of back and forth with even the people who claimed to rescue her. Now she's back to Nigeria. She's currently in treatment. But the idea of that is the person who claimed to rescue her used social media as a tool for fundraising, right? That is what they've been doing. So they are fundraising with her story, with her experience, with the claims of if you give us funding, we'll bring her back home. She didn't have to be put out there like that. Now, what that has done to some of the women who were supposed to come out is that you've given the traffickers an idea that there is a platform that could save these girls and bring them back home or take them away from that situation. So not only have you endangered her, because the back and forth we had with the trafficker for this lady, before we were able to rescue her, somebody had to help us get security to lay ambush and then get the lady and the trafficker together and took them to the embassy. It was a lot, right? The trafficker ran because already this story is already out. So that was why it took us that long. Imagine that it was all the work was done on that ground and there was nothing on social media. she would not have even had a clue that she was were coming after her, right? So now think about the many ladies who would have come out of this kind of situation. But for the fact that somebody is out there, posting and telling their stories wrong, you endanger more people. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but that's the frame I use for my work. The person first. You make sure that the people who are people of concern are kept safe. Yeah, thank you.
Make a lot of sense, Chilean, especially this idea of empowering a person than dehumanizing them. And now these issues that you told about the social media, because we have two sides of them. Social media
Mhm,
is good because, for example, connected us. We got to know your work because of that. But at the same time, from the examples that you showed, no regulation, no accountability. We can
mhm,
see how many harms is created by social media.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you so much, Chylian Ify Azuh, for sharing
Thank
with us your
you.
journey, your experiences, and your reflections with us today. It's been a real pleasure having you in this conversation, and your work keeps on reminding us that when women are supported or uh, victims of trafficking, when they're treated with dignity, compassion, and trust, communities grow stronger. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing through FremNet, and we wish you every success as you continue to champion these voices.
thank you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you for what you do for creating a platform that also gives us the opportunity to tell these stories and tell them right. It's a lot of lessons over the years, and I'm really excited that there is a platform that addresses these issues because it's one thing to identify that there are gaps, but it's another thing to have a platform that kind of bridges the gap, that helps to solve the problems and ensure that women's stories are told, right? So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chylian, for joining us. Thank you, Laura, for co-hosting this. Thank you, everyone who joined us. I hope you enjoyed these episodes of Amplifying Her Story and that inspire you to learn more about Chylian's important work and the issues we discussed. You can find more about Chylian article and the work and information about the work she is doing in the description. And then if you want to discover more stories, visit Migrant Women Press website. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and also follow us on social media to be the first to know about the future conversations and new stories. We will see you next month for another episode of Amplifying Her Story. Thank you.